Hey guys, welcome to Journey of Relaxation. Tonight we slip back to a time of velvet cloaks, muddy streets, and playhouses so rowdy they made modern rock concerts look tame. You're backstage at the Globe Theater. The air smells like old wood sweat candle wax, and wait, is that orange juice? You brush past a boy in tights, carrying what looks suspiciously like a pig's bladder filled with pomegranate pulp. No, you haven't wandered into a medieval smoothie shop. You're standing at the chaotic heart of an Elizabethan stage fight. And spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this without a stain or two. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing who's drifting off with us around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck behind a curtain and nearly collide with an actor practicing his death groan in falsetto. Around you, the backstage area thrums with nervous energy. Actors pace, whisper lines, and clutch at sheathed daggers, some real, most not. It's 1599, the original Globe has just opened, and Henry V is about to kick off its opening night. But behind the scenes, another performance is underway, the elaborate, often absurd, and occasionally sticky art of stage combat. You think today's special effects teams have it rough. Try rigging a sword fight with no lighting, no microphones, and the looming threat of a censor barging in if things get too bloody. Oh, and your blood. It better not come from an actual person. That's what the pig bladders are for. It turns out, Elizabethan theater relied less on realism and more on flair. The crowd came for drama, sure, but they stayed for the spectacle. Sword fights were essential. So were dramatic deaths. You, the average audience member, wanted to see someone gasp, stagger, then collapse into a convincing puddle of blood. And since actual bloodletting wasn't sustainable night after night, the props department got creative with fruit juice. Historians still argue whether the standard recipe for fake blood in the 1590s leaned more heavily on pomegranate or raspberry juice. Some sources say animal blood was used early on, but abandoned for obvious hygienic reasons. Have you ever tried storing fresh blood in summer without refrigeration? Others point to herbal concoctions that looked great under candlelight, but smelled suspiciously like salad dressing. But the reigning champion of Elizabethan gore, pomegranate juice. Thick red and gloriously stainy. Mix it with a bit of ale to thicken, maybe some vinegar to keep the flies off, and you've got yourself a scene-stealing stage death in a bottle, or more accurately, a bladder. You peek out from the curtains and catch the audience filling in. It's a rough mix tonight, wealthy nobles in the upper boxes and raucous groundlings below who paid a penny to stand shoulder to shoulder munching hazelnuts and heckling actors. These folks don't want subtlety. They want Hamlet to bleed. And if you're playing Hamlet, you better deliver the goods. So the actors prepare. One clutches a hidden bladder beneath his shirt lined with wax paper to keep it from leaking. Another dips a rag in cranberry juice and stuffs it into a boot heel just in case things get too dry. The goal isn't realism, it's drama. Every thrust and stab is over the top, and every squirt of blood is met with gasps, cheers, or laughter depending on the crowd. There's an unspoken rule among Elizabethan actors: if you're going to die, die big. Flail, wail, collapse like a sack of apples. One actor you hear once rehearsed a death so dramatic, he took down half the scenery with him. The other actors hated it. The audience loved it. Of course, not everyone bought the illusion. You hear a whispered anecdote about a play where the blood bag exploded too early, sending a stream of cherry juice flying into the front row. One unlucky viewer, reportedly a merchant from Shoreditch, spent the rest of the performance trying to rinse his doublet in a puddle. Let's just say he didn't applaud the curtain call. Still, this juicy stagecraft worked because the audience wanted to believe. They came for a show, and nothing sold a tragic ending like a dramatic geyser of fruit juice arcing under torchlight. The irony. All this gory grandeur happened in a world where actual violence was common. Bear-baiting rings stood just down the street. Executions drew crowds. And yet in the theater the violence was stylized, sometimes silly, always safe, at least in theory. You know, as long as the bladder didn't rupture early, or a blade wasn't accidentally sharpened. You drift toward the wings as the curtain rises. The audience roars. The first fight scene begins. Swords clash with an alarming lack of coordination, but it hardly matters. One actor spins, clutches his side, and pop a squirt of blood arcs across his tunic. The crowd erupts. Someone yells, "More fruit," and you, pressed against the back wall, finally understand. This isn't just performance, it's pageantry. It's blood and thunder on a budget, and it's only just beginning. You sidestep a puddle of something sticky as the curtain falls. The scene change is frantic. Actors rush off stage, stagehands rush on, and someone's loudly cursing about a burst pear in the wrong doublet. You're not dreaming, this really is the Elizabethan theater, and things are about to get even juicier. If you thought the sight of an actor spurting pomegranate blood was impressive, wait until you see the backstage fruit arsenal. There's a wooden crate tucked beside a prop table that would make a grocer weep. Pomegranates, blackberries, red currants, cherries, and the occasional beetroot. All perfectly ripe. All destined to be violently squeezed. You might be tempted to reach for a snack, but you stop just in time. That bowl of raspberries. It's been mashed into a lumpy paste with animal glue and water. You watch a boy no older than 12 spoon it carefully into what looks like an ox bladder. This isn't lunch. It's a murder weapon. The props master oversees it all like a medieval juice barista, adjusting pulp to liquid ratios with the kind of concentration usually reserved for alchemists. Because yes, too much liquid and the blood runs too fast, audiences laugh. Too little, and it clots too early, audiences yawn. It's a delicate balance between tragedy and comedy, and it all comes down to texture. You learn that actors had preferences too. Some swore by blackcurrant for the right color under candlelight. Others liked beetroot because it clung to fabric, giving that slow-drying, I've been stabbed for real vibe. And a few diehards still insisted on using animal blood for authenticity, though their dressing rooms usually smelled like the inside of a plague cart by the second act. Of course there were accidents. One actor you overhear apparently once slipped mid-soliloquy, landing in a puddle of his own stage blood and breaking 2 ribs. Never trust a grape, he's said to mutter before every show now. Historians still argue whether some of these fruit concoctions originated in theater or medicine. Apothecaries of the day often used pomegranate rind and mulberry syrup for treating wounds or sore throats. It's entirely possible that the prop recipes bled over pun fully intended from old herbal manuals. One scholar even posited that some stagehands doubled as amateur physicians, leading to a fair bit of ingredient sharing, which might explain why an actor's wound sometimes smelled suspiciously of cough remedy. And let's talk about those delivery systems. Ox bladders were popular, but not always convenient. Too big, too squishy. So someone, an unsung genius, figured out that animal intestines worked better for precision bursts. They could be sewn into tunics or strapped beneath corsets with tiny holes pre-cut for optimal splatter. A hard jab and voila, a crimson blossom of death across your chest. There's a humorous moment you witness during rehearsal, 2 actors choreographing a duel with long wooden swords. One of them lunges, hits the bladder too hard, and the juice shoots 10 feet sideways right into the eye of a hapless stagehand. He doesn't flinch, just mutters again and wipes his face with a sleeve already stained purple. And then there's the bladder squeeze, a last resort when the timing doesn't work. If a stab goes wrong or the actor misses the mark, someone just offstage gives a discreet pump to a hidden tube. Sometimes it hits the spot. Sometimes it sends juice spattering onto the ceiling beams where it dries into a sticky crimson constellation. Like theater graffiti, costumes too had to be designed around this sticky chaos. Seamstresses sewed special hidden pouches into tunics designed to burst on pressure. Bodices were reinforced with parchment liners to absorb the first wave of juice without collapsing. And if a character had to die more than once a week, they usually had a backup costume or 3. Because fruit juice stains like a curse, and no one wants Lady Macbeth looking like a berry tart by the end of Act 2. You begin to appreciate the sheer logistical insanity of it all. Every night gallons of juice are prepped, poured, packed, and placed only to be splattered across the floor, soaked into wood, and flung toward the audience in glorious arcs of performative death. And somehow audiences never got tired of it. They knew it wasn't real. They saw the actor breathe after death. They could smell the fruity aftermath. But none of that mattered. Because when the blood burst in the right moment, when the lighting caught it, when the actor cried out just so it felt real enough to clap for, some even collected the stained handkerchiefs afterward as souvenirs. One diary entry from 1601 describes a woman at a performance of Julius Caesar, proudly holding a cloth, marked with the prince's death. The writer doesn't mention if the cloth smelled more like oranges or onions, and while modern theater might rely on silicone pumps and stage-safe dyes, there's a charm to this old-school fruit blood frenzy. A messy, sticky, glorious mess of pulp and panic that somehow became an art form. You glance at the boy restocking the crate of cherries. He tosses one into his mouth, shrugs, and wipes his hands on a costume you're pretty sure belongs to Macbeth. The next scene's about to begin. Another death, another burst, another sticky miracle waiting to stain history. The next scene begins with a flourish of drums and the metallic clatter of swords. You ease closer to the wings where two actors are warming up with exaggerated lunges blades gleaming in the torchlight. They move like dancers, not quite elegant but choreographed with a strange, sweaty grace. Welcome to the wild world of Elizabethan stage combat, or as the actors jokingly call it, the fine art of not stabbing your friends. Stage fights in Shakespeare's time weren't about realism. Not really. They were about rhythm illusion, and selling the danger just enough that the audience gasped without someone actually losing an eyeball. You watch as the fight master steps in, correcting a foot placement here, a wrist angle there. He's old, bald, and missing two teeth, exactly the kind of man you'd expect to yell, "More blood, less murder." He walks the actors through the sequence lunge, parry, pivot, slash. It's a pattern almost like a dance routine. Counted beats, marked steps. Nothing is left to improvisation. The audience might think it's chaos. You now know better. Historians still argue whether these fight masters were trained soldiers, fencing instructors, or just retired actors with a flair for melodrama. What's certain is that every successful troupe had one. Without him, your leading man might trip over his own blade, or worse, accidentally nick the nobleman in the front row. Not a great career move. You spot a few tricks already. That overhead slash, the blade is dulled and angled to hit the flat, not the edge. The stab to the belly. It misses by inches, but the victim actor collapses like he's been run through. Then there's the audience favorite, the slow-motion death spiral. Usually ends with a dramatic flop and a timed bloodburst, though once famously it ended with the actors sliding off stage into a bucket of props. Swords were the stars, of course, but Elizabethan actors used all kinds of weapons. Broom handles passed as halberds. Whittled sticks made convincing daggers at a distance. Even tankards were weaponized for tavern brawls. The key was distance and exaggeration. You weren't fooling the eyes, you were fooling the instincts. You hear someone mutter more, stomp, less stab, and watch as an actor slams his foot theatrically to emphasize a missed hit. That's another secret sound effects. Slaps to the chest, boot stomps, thwacks with padded gloves. All carefully timed to make the fights feel alive. It's not about tricking the eye, it's about tricking the ear. There were injuries, of course. One actor once lost 2 teeth when a hilt caught him in the jaw. Another sprained his ankle when he tripped on a soggy blood bladder. And one poor soul playing Tybalt was accidentally stabbed for real mid-duel with a prop that had been mistakenly sharpened. He survived. The prop master did not survive the firing. And then there were the actors who just weren't good at fighting. One Shakespearean understudy was infamous for reversing his sword grip during fights, holding it by the blade. The audience thought it was a creative flourish. The director quietly wept into his wig. You overhear a stagehand explaining the 3-beat rule to a nervous apprentice: beat 1 the setup, beat 2 the clash, beat 3 the flourish or kill. Every fight must follow it or risk losing the crowd's attention. It's a rule more sacred than the script. Some even say Shakespeare himself wrote dialogue around the fight beats. Whether that's true or not, no one's sure. Historians still argue whether the bard's stage directions were practical notes or poetic flair, but fights were never about just the swords. They were character moments. Think of Macbeth hacking through bodies or Hamlet's final duel. The audience needed to feel something. So actors trained endlessly, not just in movement, but in breath control, in cries of pain, in knowing how to fall convincingly on a hard wooden stage. And falling. That was its own art. You didn't just crumple. You had to collapse with flair. One knee first to stagger back, the eyes wide. And if you were lucky or clever, right at the moment your hand clutched your side, someone would squeeze the bladder hidden beneath your costume. The crowd would erupt. The juice would drip. And you, oh tragic hero, would lie there basking in applause and the faint scent of elderberries. But sometimes the choreography went rogue. You hear the story of a legendary performance of Richard III, where 2 actors became so caught up in the moment they forgot the routine entirely. What followed was part dance, part slapstick, part bar brawl. The crowd loved it. Richard died dramatically. His opponent forgot to die at all. Later, you see the actors rehearsing a final duel. This one ends with both characters dying in a heap, a crumpled tangle of limb swords and half-squashed berry bladders. It's gruesome. It's theatrical. It smells like a smoothie gone rogue. But it works. And then someone from the audience yells, "Encore." The actors exchange a glance. Without missing a beat, they rise, reset, and do the fight again, this time swapping roles just for fun. Juicy, chaotic, and perfectly choreographed chaos. You think to yourself, Broadway could never. The rehearsal clears, and you move closer to a costume rack sagging under the weight of velvet brocade and the occasional suspicious drip. Among the tunics and doublets, a peculiar smell lingers, not quite blood, not quite fruit stand. A sweet sour tang, like a spilled cider left in the sun. You've just discovered the second layer of Elizabethan stage violence costumes rigged to bleed. Tonight's Juliet has vanished behind a tapestry to have her bodice stuffed not with padding, but with pig bladder pouches filled with a carefully measured blend of cherry and pomegranate juice. The prop master and dresser argue quietly over the position too high, and it'll pop with a shoulder wound. Too low, and the stab misses it altogether. Meanwhile, Juliet waits patiently, arms up, while someone shoves a blood bladder under her corset like it's a medieval juice bomb. Costumes weren't just for flair in Elizabethan theater, they were weapons of drama. Every fold, every lacing was another opportunity to hide a bladder or run a tube. You learn quickly that nothing was left to chance. The dying spot was pre-chalked on stage. The squeeze timing was practiced. And if you missed your mark, you didn't just mess up the scene, you wasted fruit, stained another actor, and possibly got yelled at by the wardrobe mistress, which by all accounts was far worse than dying. Historians still argue whether actors or dressers were chiefly responsible for these hidden contraptions. Some plays credit the costumers. Others suggest actors built their own rigs, especially those playing death-heavy roles like Brutus or Lady Macbeth. There's one surviving letter where a young actor boasts about sewing a juice bladder into his hose so cleverly that I did bleed from the thigh as a wounded stag. Modesty none. Accuracy debatable. You pick up a stained tunic labeled Othello. The chest bears a faint purplish bloom, last night's death no doubt. You flip it inside out and find a lining with crusted remnants of dried pomegranate pulp. Tucked inside a hidden flap is a stitched pouch still damp and padded with bits of lamb's wool to soften the pop. Ingenious. Disgusting. Theatrical perfection. As you turn, you catch a flurry of activity near the quick change curtain. An actor bursts through, unbuttoning his doublet with one hand, blood dripping from his side, well, technically from the wine-soaked rag hidden there. The dresser moves fast, rips the pouch out, swaps a fresh one in, pulls the new tunic closed in seconds. The actor gulps air and goes back out, this time to die for real. Again. Third time this week. There's a legend about one actor so devoted to realism that he insisted on a double pop rig, one bladder in the chest, one in the mouth. At the climax of his death scene, he spat a mouthful of red juice while clutching his bleeding ribs. The audience went wild. The other actors avoided him for days. It wasn't just bladders, though. Some tricks used cloth soaked in juice tucked into sleeves. When the actor clutched a wound, they'd squeeze the fabric to drip through their fingers. Others tied thin tubes to their arms with hidden pouches at the biceps. A well-timed flex, a pinch, and the juice would run down their elbow. It looked horrifying. It smelled, well, let's just say every theater had a fly problem. And for female roles played by boys in wigs and corsets, the setups were even trickier. Bladders had to be smaller, more discreet, and placed so they wouldn't distort the costume silhouette. A wardrobe girl confides to you in a whisper, of course, that they sometimes used goat intestine tubes stitched along the ribs hidden by ribbon lacing. Lemon juice for the dainty ones, she adds, rolling her eyes. Makes a brighter stain, see? You're not sure what's more impressive, the ingenuity or the sheer mess. Costumes had to be cleaned after every show, or at least rinsed enough not to stink. Buckets of rainwater sat backstage where apprentices dunked tunics and scrubbed stains with lye. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes last week's Brutus still smelled faintly fermented. You imagine what this would look like from the front row, a clean kill, a crimson bloom, an actor collapsing gracefully into a puddle of juice and poetry. But back here, it's all pinch tubes, hurried sewing, and actors whispering, "Did it pop? Did it look like it popped?" There's a quiet pride among the costumers. You hear one mutter, "I don't care if she can't cry on cue, my seams burst right on time." The others nod. Of course, mishaps were part of the fun. You hear the story of a King Lear who fell so hard on his fake blood pouch that it sprayed backward, hitting Cordelia and knocking her wig sideways. Or the infamous McJuice incident where an ambitious Macbeth packed 3 bladders into his chest and belly and ended up looking like he'd exploded. The crowd loved it. The wardrobe mistress fainted, and yet amid the chaos, the illusion held. Somehow, through dripping sleeves and bleeding bodices, the tragedy lived. Because every stitch, every pouch, every burst was for them, the audience. They didn't need realism. They needed blood that flew like poetry and landed like thunder. The curtain rises again. Someone's about to die. You watch the actor reach inside his doublet, pat his pouch, nod to the wings. He steps forward, blade raised. You already know how it ends, but you stay to watch the juice fly. The next time you pass through the backstage corridor, something squishes under your boot. You lift your foot slowly. A half-crushed fig. Or was it a date hard to tell under the foot smear of the theater's busiest hour? But one thing's certain: you've wandered into the underbelly of Elizabethan stagecraft, and it smells like a very confused fruit bowl. A runner brushes past you holding a small basket of something reddish and sticky. Get that to Laertes. Now someone barks from behind a curtain. You follow the scent of citrus and juice down the steps to where the real blood of the theater is kept, the prop pantry. Or more precisely, the makeshift fruit stand masquerading as one. By day, these ingredients sit in the stalls of London's marketplaces, Cheapside, Covent Garden, or Southwark, gleaming under the sun, ripe with sweet promise. By night, they've become crimson stand-ins for mortal wounds. Pomegranates, black cherries, red currants, beetroot, the occasional tomato. All chosen with care, not for flavor, but for their stain. You watch a harried apprentice counting pomegranates like they're gold coins. 6 for the duels, 2 for Lady M, and 1 for emergencies, he mutters. Where's the vinegar flask? It slows the spoil. This blending of commerce and carnage wasn't accidental. Elizabethan theaters often struck quiet arrangements with nearby grocers and market sellers. Leftover fruits, slightly bruised, unsellable, or dangerously overripe, were purchased in bulk at discount. Some vendors knew exactly what the props masters wanted. Others asked no questions. More for the dying boys than a fishmonger was once overheard saying, handing over a barrel of raspberries. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were informal or part of a more organized supply chain. There's one surviving note from a theater bookkeeper referencing Mr. Kettle for Pulp's 4D Weekly. Was Mr. Kettle a grocer, a farmer, a black market juice dealer? The past leaves us deliciously vague, but you begin to understand nothing about this was casual. Actors and prop crews treated their juice recipes like spellcraft. A little honey to thicken. A splash of vinegar to cut the sweetness. A pinch of alum to preserve. The ideal mixture had to be dark enough to resemble blood, thick enough to pool, but not so sticky it gummed up the costume seams. And where did all this get mixed? Sometimes in the dressing rooms, sometimes in buckets behind the stage, but more often in nearby inns. You wander through the back of the theater and peek into a side alley where a young boy stirs a sloshing bowl of something deep red while 2 rats look on in concern. Don't worry, sirs, the boy says solemnly. Not for eating. The juice gets filtered through cloth, funneled into bladders or intestine pouches, or if the scene calls for a geyser, poured into a leather bellows. You spot one tucked behind a prop crate, patched, stained, and suspiciously damp. A whisper spreads that it once squirted a full pint of cherry juice across the front row during Titus Andronicus. Someone from the audience fainted. The actor playing Lavinia wrote a sonnet about it. Of course, not all sources of blood were fruit. You find jars of red ochre mixed with egg whites, sometimes used for quick face wounds. One actor, determined to look freshly battered, reportedly used ground rhubarb and goat's milk. It worked. But the smell was described as sour despair. Accidents happened. Always. You hear one story from a grizzled propsman. A novice mixed raspberry pulp and wine, overfilled a bladder, and set it too close to a torch. Midway through the second act, the pouch burst in his pocket with an audible pop, leaving him drenched, furious, and smelling like a failed picnic. He finished the show anyway. The audience thought it was part of the act. You're shown the infamous bloodboard, a plank behind the stage where each night's blood scenes are listed, complete with juice blends, pouch counts, and placement notes. Juliet front left rib 1-2 bladder beetroot, chalk palm. Brutus center chest 1 bladder plus arm drip. It looks more like a butcher's ledger than a performance plan. There's even a code for emergencies. FR means fruit run. If a pouch bursts too early, or someone forgets their rig, a runner bolts for the pantry, grabs the nearest blend, and shoves it into a sleeve or neckline with seconds to spare. The record, 12 seconds. Set during a particularly bloody Macbeth in 1603. The juice still dripped by the time Macbeth hit the floor. By now you've begun to accept that no Elizabethan play, at least none worth its ticket, was without fruit. Whether rigged in pouches, pooled in buckets, or splattered across the boards, this was theater by way of orchard. You pause beside a basket of grapes. The juice is starting to ferment. Flies buzz lazily above the rim. You think about the groundlings laughing and crying and ducking as blood bursts arc over the stage. They paid a penny to see kings fall, lovers die, and heroes bleed, and all of it thanks to the unsung labor of fruit buyers and backroom juicers. One actor walks past you adjusting his sword belt. He points at a pomegranate, shrugs, and says, "Better than pig's blood. Easier on the boots." You smile because you believe him. You've seen the chaos. You've walked the back rooms. And now you know the lifeblood of Elizabethan theater wasn't just poetry and passion, it was pulp. You're beginning to think no one warned these actors about the slipperiness of fresh berry juice. Because just now, as Hamlet makes his final lunge toward Claudius, you watch his heel skid out from under him on a smear of blackberry pulp, and down he goes, sword flailing, crown askew, landing flat on his back with a stage-shaking thud. The audience erupts. Was it intentional doesn't matter. It gets a laugh, a gasp, a cheer. Theater gold. Backstage, however, it's less charming. Someone is already mopping furiously. Another apprentice mutters 6th time this week. You glance down. A drying purple slick leads off stage like a trail from a wounded grape monster. Welcome to the unspoken hazard of Elizabethan special effects. Stage blood was a serious slip risk. Actors learned quickly that dying well meant more than just gasping and clutching your chest. You also had to die safely. Because nothing ruins a tragic finale like face planting into a pool of beetroot. You hear one particularly grim story of an actor in Julius Caesar who took his et tu brute so seriously he slipped, knocked his head, and missed the next 3 performances. The audience thought it was part of the show, the stagehands less so. To counteract this, stages were often pre-dusted with sand or sawdust to absorb the juice. Just before curtain, a boy would dart out with a small bucket and sprinkle the killing zones. It helped sort of. But it also created a new hazard, sticky clumps of fruit sawdust paste that smelled like a medieval energy bar and glued your shoes to the floor. Historians still argue whether this practice was standard at all public theaters, or just a necessity for particularly violent plays like Titus Andronicus or the Spanish tragedy. Some records suggest the blood zones were mapped and maintained by designated apprentices, usually the youngest and most expendable. You spot one now, a sleepy child holding a mop with juice up to his elbows, yawning as if this were the most normal job in the world. Even when fights were meticulously rehearsed, the juice had a mind of its own. Once the bladder popped, anything could happen. One misaligned squeeze and the blood could hit the actor's eye, stain a fellow performer's mouth, or dribble down the wrong leg entirely. You watch an actor practicing a controlled fall and muttering, "Please don't go left this time." Last night I looked like I wet myself. The props crew tries to mitigate chaos by assigning color codes. Dark red for fatal wounds, lighter juice blends for scrapes or early injuries. But let's be real, once it's flying, it's fruit salad roulette. You hear about a particularly juicy Macbeth where Lady M's nightgown soaked up so much berry that she literally left footprints on the set. Then, there are the wig disasters. Ah, yes. One of theater's most cursed phrases, sticky wig. Imagine you're playing a nobleman complete with flowing locks stitched from goat hair. You die, gloriously collapse backward, and splat your headland squarely in a pool of juice. What happens next is less Shakespeare and more slapstick. You rise for curtain call, your wig half glued to your cheek, dripping what looks like raspberry jam. One actor solved this by sewing a bladder into the wig itself, letting the blood trickle down from his scalp in a gruesome theatrical waterfall. It looked incredible. Until the heat from the torches caused the juice to boil slightly. Mid-scene it steamed. The crowd thought he was possessed. He took a bow anyway. You also learn about the silent arms race between actors to outbleed one another. There was an unspoken competition to deliver the most shocking, most memorable death. One actor even tried to incorporate a fake eyeball soaked in red currant jam that popped out at the moment of his death. Unfortunately, he timed it poorly, and it landed in the front row. A patron caught it, took it home. Theaters were strange places. Among all this, you notice a small ritual repeated again and again the moment after the curtain drops when actors examine the blood damage. They check their sleeves, shake out their boots, look at each other and say, "Did it hit the mark?" You begin to see this not just as vanity, but as pride. The messier the aftermath, the better the illusion. A good stage death leaves behind a battlefield. A great one leaves stains no mop can fully erase. And the audience loved it. They leaned forward during duels, gasped at the bursts, winced at the drips, laughed when things went wrong, and applauded when they went right. If a particularly juicy death sent juice flying into the pit, groundlings would wear it like a badge of honor. I got splashed by Othello, one young man bragged after a performance. It smelled like elderberry, glorious. But for all the laughter and accidents, the goal was sincerity. These actors bled to make stories real, to bring tragedy and betrayal to life with nothing more than fruit and flair. The sticky chaos was just part of the magic. Backstage, the mop boy finally finishes his work. He looks at the now damp floor, sighs, and tips the bucket. Another scene awaits. Another puddle coming. You step aside as a freshly juiced actor hurries past you, trailing crimson footprints behind him. You follow the prints with your eyes and notice they curve just slightly at the edge of the stage. Someone's going to slip again tonight, probably on purpose. Backstage is buzzing, not with the chatter of actors, but with the squelch of wet bladders being loaded into tunics like tiny fruity time bombs. You squeeze into a narrow space behind the curtain, where the unsung heroes of the Elizabethan theater, the apprentices, are prepping for war. Not real war, mind you, the kind where no one actually dies, but everyone ends up stained from neck to knee. Tonight's show has 5 deaths in Act 3 alone, and every one of them calls for a dramatic front-row splashing burst. You glance at the hand-scrawled prop sheet tacked to the wall. Act 3, 5 pouches, 2 partials, 1 refill mid-scene urgent. Mid-scene refills. That's what sets your heart racing a little. Because if there's one thing tougher than faking a bloody death in front of 800 rowdy Londoners, it's sneaking off stage mid-fight to have your intestines quietly reloaded with cherry juice. Apprentices swarm like bees darting between actors' pouches in hand. They carry everything from ox bladders tied with string to goat stomach pouches sealed with beeswax. One even has what looks like a hollowed-out squash with a cork in it. Experimental, the boy mutters when he sees you looking, not stage-ready. You quickly learn that this isn't just frantic, it's ritual. There's a flow. The bladders are filled at a side table where a master juicer, yes, that's what they're calling him, ladles out precise quantities of thickened blood juice. Tonight's mix, pomegranate and beetroot with a dash of vinegar to cut the shine and prevent ants. There are no breaks, no do-overs. Actors rush in drenched from one scene and immediately get patched up for the next. Think pit crew at a racetrack, but everyone's wearing corsets and the fuel is fermented fruit. One actor, clearly exhausted, lifts his doublet. Left side refill, he mutters. Without missing a beat, the nearest apprentice pulls out a half-full bladder, ties off the dripping end, and stuffs in a fresh pouch. He uses a bent spoon to guide the tube through the slit in the fabric. This entire exchange takes 6 seconds. Historians still argue whether these rapid swaps were rehearsed with the same intensity as the fights themselves. Some believe apprentices learned timing through years of observation. Others claim actors trained them personally. One hand holds the pouch, the other pulls the string. A few even say there were hand signals mid-scene. A hand across the chest meant, "Reload me now." You believe it. You've seen how precise they are. A pouch isn't just shoved in, it's placed, angled, tuned like an instrument. Squeeze wrong and the juice oozes instead of sprays. Wait too long and the scene ends before the burst. One misplaced second and Juliet just sinks down quietly instead of bleeding her heartbreak across the floorboards. The refill crew isn't just about timing. It's about nerves of steel. You hear of one infamous moment when an apprentice panicked mid-show and tried to refill a pouch from a wine jug instead of juice. The resulting blood was pink, smelled of cloves, and made the dying actor hiccup through his final monologue. No one ever let him forget it. There's also the infamous bladder mix-up incident. 2 actors playing rival knights accidentally swapped costumes. One ended up with no blood pouch. The other had 3. When he died, it looked like he'd been exploded from the inside. Someone fainted. A wardrobe girl cheered. Not all refills are so dramatic. Some are subtle, like the quick sleeve injection where an actor lifts their arm for a dramatic gesture, and an apprentice slips a tiny tube through the cuff. One good squeeze later, and down comes the juice. Nobody sees the refill. Everybody sees the result. You watch as the refill team huddles around a chalkboard diagramming tonight's biggest challenge, the mid-duel refill during Coriolanus. The actor has 3 lines, 1 roll, and a turn toward the audience before he gets stabbed again. That's the window. 5 seconds, maybe 6. The plan as he rolls, he'll brush past the wings. An apprentice will shove a new bladder into a specially sewn slit in his backplate. The actor won't stop, won't pause. He'll walk right into the next line, new blood pouch primed and ready. If it works, it'll look like a seamless, gory miracle. You find yourself holding your breath as the moment arrives. The actor rolls, stumbles toward the wings, and for the briefest flicker of time there, the apprentice darts forward, hand to tunic. There's a barely audible FWP as the new pouch is inserted. The actor charges back into the scene, delivers the line, and gets stabbed again. This time the blood erupts from his chest in a crimson arc that lands squarely on the stage's edge. The crowd roars. It's beautiful, it's awful, it's art, and just as quickly the apprentice is gone, vanished into the shadows, mop already in hand for the next cleanup. You wonder how many of these refill kids went on to become actors, or playwrights, or prop designers. You hope some of them did, because watching this you realize they weren't just backstage help. They were the pulsing, sticky heart of every dramatic death. Another actor stumbles off stage covered in juice and glory. "Refill me for Act 4, he says already halfway into another costume. The boy nods, opens a fresh bladder, and begins to tie. And you quietly applaud from the wings, because no one sees these hands, but everyone sees what they leave behind. It's late now, past the halfway point in the performance, and backstage is beginning to smell like a battlefield made of jam. You find yourself near the prop bench again, where a small collection of ruptured bladders, sticky rags, and discarded fruit peels have gathered like the remains of a very theatrical harvest. Someone has carved a face into an overripe beetroot and placed it next to a broken dagger. Yorick, a stagehand, mutters. He's had a rough night. The mood has shifted. Act 4 looms, and with it the most emotionally intense scenes. Gone are the bombastic sword fights and flamboyant bursts of blood. This is where the tears start, the slow collapses, the whispered final words. You're in the part of the play where the bleeding lingers, and the juice must do the same. No more dramatic spurts, no geysers. Now it's about the drip. You hover near the costuming station as an actor playing Gloucester in King Lear has a small bladder tube sewn just under his collarbone. It's connected to a pouch tucked into the shoulder seam of his tunic. A gentle pinch on the line, and the juice will ooze down his chest, catching the audience's eye without upstaging the monologue. This is the work of a quiet genius, the slow bleeders. These are the blood rigs designed not to explode but to weep. A slit in the palm, a shallow wound to the thigh, a slow soak through linen. All crafted to keep the audience leaning and squinting through candlelight, wondering, is that real? Historians still argue whether these subtle rigs were used in the earliest Elizabethan plays, or if they developed later as audiences grew more blood-savvy. One theory suggests that as fruit blends became more sophisticated, the slow bleed emerged as a tasteful alternative to the splash zone chaos of earlier years. Another theory. Some actors were just tired of slipping. You peek over a dresser's shoulder as she prepares a sleeve with hidden pads soaked in a dark currant mixture. The juice has been thickened with sugar and wine reduction designed to seep slowly and cling to the fabric. It looks almost elegant. She pats it, checks the stain pattern, and whispers, "Let it cry, not scream." And that's exactly what the audience wants now. They've had their thrills. Now they want their hearts broken. One particularly beloved effect is the breath bleed, a small pouch tucked inside the actor's neckline paired with a tiny clay pin. Mid-speech, the actor inhales, shakily, accidentally taps the pin, and the juice leaks down his chest, like a final breath made visible. It takes 3 seconds. It lands like thunder. You see it in action during a performance of Othello. The actor clutches Desdemona's hand as he collapses beside her. His tunic darkens slowly, a red thread blooming outward like heartbreak itself. No spurt, no pop, just that spreading stain. The audience goes so still you can hear the wind through the timbers. It's magic. Sticky, fermented, fruit-scented magic. There's an ongoing debate among the actors backstage which is harder, the splash or the seep. Some swear by the old ways, bladders strapped to ribs, dramatic pops, gasps from the pit. Others take pride in the slow art. Anyone can burst, one actor says. But it takes control to bleed with restraint. You glance at the wall of costume scraps and note that the ones with the most glorious stains aren't always from the splashiest scenes. One sleeve bears a quiet, delicate streak across the inner wrist. Just a trace of beetroot and wine. It's almost lovely. Another favorite, the chest seep. To pull it off, actors wore multiple layers, with the innermost lined in absorbent wool. A small bladder tucked close to the heart would leak over the scene, slowly saturating the outermost linen. By the time the actor finished their final speech, they were practically soaked without a single pop or squirt. Just sorrow, written in juice. You hear a soft laugh as someone recounts a failure, an actor playing Romeo who sat too close to a torch. His slow bleed pouch warmed, thinned, and began leaking far too early. By the time he entered, he looked like he'd already died backstage. Juliet, improvising, declared, "Thou art wounded, love," and everyone went with it. Crisis averted. Juice misbehaving. It happens. The slow rigs are temperamental. Juice consistency matters. Fabric absorbency matters. Even the air temperature can speed or delay the effect. You learn that prop masters kept notes not just about recipes but humidity. "Don't use current blend in hot weather," one scribbled margin says. "Looks like jam." And while most juice recipes were guarded like family secrets, you overhear a few shared among the apprentices. Widow's vein beetroot port wine and crushed hibiscus used for wrist bleeds. Dead Prince blackcurrant and vinegar with lamb's blood for the purists. Ghost bloom water-thinned cherry juice laced with egg white for when the blood needs to shimmer. Some actors even had signature blends. "He dies with blackberry," a dresser says dreamily, "always does. So dark it's nearly black." Soaks a doublet like grief. You wonder how many hours were spent perfecting these bleeds. How many actors whispered to their costumers, "Just a little more stain on the cuff," or "let it start with the second line." This was theater not as illusion but as illusion with recipes. And now backstage again, you hear the quiet tap of feet as the next death prepares. No fanfare, no shouting. Just an actor in a pale tunic, a red thread barely beginning to show along the hem. He takes a breath, steps into the spotlight, and begins his monologue. The juice will do its part. Slowly, silently, beautifully. The crowd is humming now. You can hear it even from backstage, low chatter, breathless awe, the rustle of cloaks and capes as the audience leans forward. You've seen 6 deaths, 4 splashes, and 1 absolutely show-stopping collapse into a puddle of something vaguely resembling a berry compote. But now it's time for the big one, the final death. The one people will talk about on the walk home. The one that demands not just blood, but poetry. This is the closer, and the stakes are higher than ever. You find yourself beside the Bloodmaster himself, an older actor turned prop genius named Rafe, who smells faintly of vinegar and dignity. He's prepping the final pouch, and his hands move with slow reverence. "This one's for Lear," he murmurs. "Takes longer. Gotta hold through the storm speech." Rafe doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. He's the one who keeps the tragedy flowing literally. He's built contraptions no one else quite understands, like the triple-sleeve rig with feather valves, or the infamous belt pouch that once splattered a 6-foot radius. You point to a strange contraption lying nearby, 3 bladders all tied to a central squeeze bulb. "Ah," Rafe says with a proud smile. "The triptych. I used it for Caesar last midsummer. Got applause before the scene even ended." Historians still argue whether such stage effects evolved from battlefield medicine or kitchen ingenuity. One popular theory suggests the earliest multi-bladder devices borrowed techniques from pig gut sausage making. It would explain a lot, including why the best blood makers also had opinions on casing stretch and wine reduction. But no matter the origin, what you're seeing now is unmistakably the pinnacle of Elizabethan stage bleeding. Lear's costume is a pale robe, simple, unadorned, the perfect canvas. The bladder is tucked under the belt, but 2 backup pouches are hidden in his sleeves. One leaks downward. One is positioned for the ultimate finale, a hand-to-heart clutch that will send juice streaking across the front. Tragic, inevitable, deliciously dramatic. The actor, an older man with trembling hands and a booming voice, sits quietly as the team works around him. They don't speak much. It's like a sacred rite. Dresser, prop boy, bloodmaster. Each with a role. Each bladder pre-tested. Each drip angle rehearsed. You hear someone whisper, "He's doing the seated collapse tonight." The others nod. It's one of Lear's most subtle exits, no flailing, no shout, just a soft slide to the ground. The juice will start when he touches his chest. A slow spread. A hush will fall. If all goes well, someone in the audience will sob. And if it doesn't, well, there's always the backup pouch in the knee seam, just in case he lands too low and the chest bladder doesn't drain. Because in Elizabethan tragedy, redundancy is everything. Backstage, you watch a runner hover near the curtain with a fresh tunic. If something goes wrong, if a bladder bursts early, if a drip runs cold, they'll swap the robe mid-scene. You've seen it done. Once during a Hamlet, the actor paused during a loss. Poor Yorick turned ever so slightly and had his shirt swapped without a single groundling noticing. But Lear won't need it. You can feel it. The play moves toward its final beat. On stage, the madness builds, the voices rise, and then Lear enters, carrying Cordelia. His robes are pristine, his eyes wild, and somewhere under all that poetry and pain, a bladder of berry juice waits to bring it all home. He howls, he curses, he pleads, and then he falls silent. His hand trembles toward his chest. A pause. Press. The robe begins to darken. Slowly. So slowly you'd miss it if you weren't watching for it. The juice spreads like sorrow. The audience leans in. And as Lear collapses to his knees, the blood trails with him. No splatter. No scream. Just a deep, beautiful stain like grief made visible. The audience is silent. You feel your chest tighten. This isn't about juice anymore. It's about how people grieve together, how they recognize pain, how a man on a stage soaked in fruit can still bring a crowd of rowdy Londoners to stillness. And then just as the lights begin to fade, a second trail appears from his sleeve. A slow drip. One final gift. It catches the torchlight. You swear it gleams. The curtain falls. Backstage, no one cheers. Not yet. The actor lies still for a beat longer, letting the moment breathe. Then he lifts his head, wipes juice from his cheek, and grins. "You see it hit the floor," he asks. Rafe nods, proud as a parent. Every drop. You glance down and realize the hem of Lear's robe is soaked, trailing small splashes in his wake. The mop boys will hate it. The audience will love it. And tomorrow night they'll do it all again, just as bloody, just as poetic, just as perfectly choreographed. One actor walks by and claps you on the shoulder. That's what we call a crimson encore. The last traces of fruit-scented blood linger in the air as you follow the actors into the quiet of the dressing rooms. It's a different world now, far from the roar of the crowd, the harsh glare of torchlight, and the splashy chaos of staged deaths. Here, amidst the sweat-stained doublets and blood-blotched linens, you witness the aftermath of a night's work. There's a certain ritual to post-show cleanup that almost feels like a sacred rite. The costumers and apprentices gather around buckets filled with murky water, swirling with the faded remnants of pomegranate and beetroot. You watch as they scrub at the fabric, trying to coax the stubborn stains free without damaging the delicate embroidery or thin silks. It's a slow and thankless task, but one that must be done every night. Historians still debate whether Elizabethan theaters employed dedicated laundry crews, or if this was done by the apprentices themselves as part of their training. Some accounts hint at contracts with nearby laundresses, while others paint a picture of exhausted boys tasked with scrubbing bloody rags until their hands were raw. You listen to the soft murmurs among the workers, the quiet camaraderie born of shared toil. One apprentice jokes about the bleed-through that never quite comes out the way some stains become a permanent mark of honor, like scars from battles fought on stage. Another wistfully recalls the day a famous actor accidentally left a blood-stained tunic in a nobleman's laundry basket, resulting in a confused and outraged patron the next morning. Despite the mess and the effort, there's pride here. Pride in the spectacle created, in the illusions crafted so carefully that audiences believed in the violence and heartbreak. You sense a quiet satisfaction in knowing that every drip, every splash, every stain contributed to the magic of the performance. As the cleaning winds down, you catch sight of the actors removing their bloodied costumes, carefully folding them away for the next night. There's a tenderness to their movements, as if they're closing the chapter on a story both brutal and beautiful. Outside, the city hums with life. The streets of London still buzz with chatter about the play, about the deaths, about the remarkable blood effects. Somewhere, a child wears a red-stained cloak, proudly having been splattered during a raucous scene. You step outside the cool night air, washing away the scent of fruit and sweat. The theater's wooden doors creak closed behind you, holding within them a world of passion craft and the strange, sticky art of bleeding with fruit juice. And as you walk away, you carry with you the secrets of a stage where death is a carefully choreographed dance, where juice replaces blood, and where every drop tells a story. You find yourself wandering through the quiet streets near the theater, the city settling down after a night of spectacle and chaos. The air is thick with the mingled scents of roasting chestnuts, smoke from tavern fires, and the lingering tang of crushed berries, a scent that follows you like a shadow, a reminder of the staged carnage left behind. Your thoughts drift to the actors themselves. You imagine the strain of their nightly performances, not just the emotional toll of embodying tragedy, but the physical discomfort of wearing soaked costumes and bearing the weight of hidden juice bladders. It's a kind of endurance art centuries before the term existed. You overhear a group of actors at a tavern corner table, voices low but lively. One boasts about his perfectly timed blood burst in the last act. Another complains about a bladder that popped prematurely, soaking his wig and ruining his carefully rehearsed exit. There's laughter, teasing camaraderie, the kind born from shared risks and messy theatrics. Historians still argue whether the physical demands of bleeding on stage influenced acting styles. Some suggest it led to a more exaggerated physicality, others to a subtlety born of necessity. What's clear is that the blood effects were not mere props, but an integral part of performance, shaping the rhythm and pacing of scenes. You're struck by the ingenuity and resilience of these players. The way they transformed simple fruits into symbols of violence and sorrow. The care with which they balanced illusion and practicality. The unspoken rules of engagement behind the scenes, where a burst bladder meant both triumph and terror. As the night deepens, you reflect on the paradox of their craft to make death seem real. Actors had to master the art of controlled destruction, ruining costumes, slipping on sticky floors, and enduring the sticky messes that came with every staged stabbing and bleeding fall. Yet despite the hardships, the theater thrived. Audiences flocked to witness the spectacle, eager to see blood fly and tragedies unfold, all powered by the humble juice of fruits. You pause outside a darkened window where a final rehearsal unfolds, soft voices, careful movements, a rehearsal of blood bladders and timing. You smile, knowing that the magic of Elizabethan theater is as alive now as it was then, carried in the blood-red stains of history. The sun is just beginning to rise as you stand outside the theater, the city waking up slowly around you. The night's performances are over, but the echoes of sword clashes and blood-soaked monologues still linger in your mind like a vivid dream. You realize that the heart of Elizabethan theater was not just the words or the actors, but the messy, sticky ingenuity that made blood visible, palpable, and unforgettable. Backstage, the quiet hum of post-show rituals continues. Costumes hang stained and tired, waiting for the next night's resurrection. The apprentices, bleary-eyed but dedicated, fold bladders with care, preparing the next batch of fruit juice for another round of theatrical carnage. Their hands are stained, their movements practiced and sure. They are the invisible lifeblood of the theater. You think back to the complex choreography of juice, timing, and movement that made each death a carefully orchestrated spectacle. How the actors, apprentices, and prop masters collaborated in this dance of illusion and reality, sometimes slipping, sometimes splattering, but always delivering stories that resonated deeply with their audiences. Historians still debate many aspects. Were some blood recipes more symbolic than practical? Did certain fruit blends carry cultural meanings beyond their visual effect? And to what extent did the danger of juice spills shape the very design of Elizabethan stages? These questions remain as rich and layered as the blood-red stains themselves. Now, as the city stirs awake, you feel a quiet awe for the people who, night after night, transformed simple fruit juice into the lifeblood of tragedy and comedy alike. They created a world where blood was both real and imagined, messy, yet beautiful, a testament to human creativity and the enduring power of theater. So before you drift off tonight, remember this: behind every splash, every stain, every carefully timed drip, there's a story. A story of passion, of craft, and of fruit juice that made the Elizabethan stage come alive in ways that still captivate us centuries later. You take a deep breath, the scent of pomegranate and beetroot fading softly, and step away from the theater, carrying with you the rich, sticky history of bloodfruit and stagecraft. Now, as you settle deeper into your pillow, the chaos of the theater fades into a gentle hush. Imagine the soft glow of candlelight flickering just beyond your eyelids, casting dancing shadows that mimic the long-gone performances. The scent of crushed berries lingers faintly in the air, a sweet reminder of all the stories told through blood and juice. Let your breathing slow, matching the rhythm of those slow bleeds, the quiet drips of juice tracing invisible paths down fabric, echoing the slow unfolding of grief on stage. Feel the weight of the actors' courage, their willingness to slip, to stain, to bleed for the magic of a story. Picture the careful hands of the apprentices mopping and cleaning, folding stained linens, with a quiet pride preparing for the next night's dance between life and death, juice and illusion. Their work is unseen, but vital, a testament to dedication and craft. As you drift, know that the theater's heartbeat still pulses in those stained costumes and well-worn stages. That behind every dramatic death lies a touch of humanity, a messy, beautiful blend of artistry, risk, and the simple juice of fruit. So breathe in the calm, the rich history, and let the world of Elizabethan theater slip softly away, leaving only the gentle hum of stories told and retold, bloodied yet enduring. Good night and sweet dreams.